I'd like to welcome everyone to the CHERN online briefing. My name is Jelena Gledić. I'm CHERN's Science Communication Coordinator and a China researcher based at the University of Belgrade in Serbia. I will be moderating today's event. Now, first, a few words about CHERN. CHERN, the China and Europe Research Network, is a platform for knowledge exchange among academic and non-academic communities, focusing on China's increasing presence in Europe. It has been supported by COST, the European Cooperation in Science and Technology, as a cost action since November 2019. CHERN is chaired by Nana de Graaf, with Jeffrey Henderson as its vice chair. It currently has 5 working groups working on different topics with their respective coordinators, and it has more than 300 working group members. In our various activities, one of our aims is to facilitate exchanges between media and journalists and policymakers, and recognizing the specific needs of these groups, the idea for the CHERN online briefing was born. This is a new initiative for CHERN. This is the first event. It is spearheaded by CHERN's core group members, Agota Reves, who is with us today, and Alexandra Svetlicinii as well with us, and myself. This initiative seeks to identify some significant events in the context of China's European presence and provide primarily journalists, but also policymakers and other researchers with relevant insights from researchers from our network. The idea is to keep these briefings very short and practical, and then leave it open to you whether you want to pursue on a one-on-one basis some topic further. That is why we will have just a brief introduction into the topic, which I will present. We will have short inputs from our 3 speakers, around 5 minutes each, and then we'll have between 10 and 20 minutes for a general questions and answers session. And do keep in mind, the idea isn't to exhaust everything about the topic today, but rather to provide some initial insights and make connections that can then be further developed. As you can see, the meeting is now in the format of a webinar. It is being recorded, and after the short presentations, we will invite everyone who wishes to join into the call in the Zoom role of a participant. That doesn't mean you necessarily need to contribute, but in case you want to join with your video and audio, you can then ask questions directly to our speakers. You can also use the chat function, but that Q&A part of this event will not be recorded. Now on to the topic. In this first CHERN online briefing, and if we can go to the next slide, please, we deal with the China-Serbia Free Trade Agreement. To better understand the FTA, it is important to give an overview of Sino-Serbian relations. The Republic of Serbia and the People's Republic of China currently have quite close political and socioeconomic relations, building on diplomatic ties established in 1955 between the PRC and the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, and further fortified, especially through the bombing of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade in 1999 by NATO. The 2 countries have established what is now called an iron friendship. In 2009, they established a strategic partnership, which was deepened in 2013, and then became a comprehensive strategic partnership in 2016. It should, however, be noted, for those of you who are not in tune with China's foreign policy, all these terms, the strategic partnership, the deepened strategic and comprehensive strategic partnership, as well as the iron friendship, are all commonly used terms in China's foreign policy to denote a specific type of bilateral relation between China and another country. It is also important to note that Serbia is part of the China and Central and Eastern European countries cooperation framework, which was established in 2012. It was then known as 16+1. Now it's 14+1, 1 being China and the other number, the number of countries within this framework. And Serbia is also part of China's global infrastructure initiative, the Belt and Road Initiative, which started in 2013. And Serbia has the largest share of planned Chinese investments of all CEE countries. Now, within this context and following this close cooperation and agreements in many areas, on October 17th last year, 2023, witnessed by the presidents of both countries, China's Minister of Commerce and Serbia's Minister of Domestic and Foreign Trade signed the Free Trade Agreement on behalf of their respective governments. The FTA was signed in Beijing at the Third Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation, along with a number of other bilateral memorandums and action plans. Now, in the context of China-Europe relations, it is important to note that the President of Serbia and the Prime Minister of Hungary were the only leaders of European countries at the Third Belt and Road Forum for International Cooperation. And it is also important to note that this FTA is the first one signed between China and a Central and Eastern European country. The main aim of the agreement is to facilitate cooperation and trade in various domains, mainly within the framework of the BRI and the Sino-Serbian Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. The very document of the FTA is around 850 pages long, and it lists around 10,000 products from each country that will be exempt from import duties. The Serbian parliament has ratified the agreement, and it will come into effect once the legal procedure is finalized on the Chinese side, which is expected to be probably in June this year. And there is likely to be much more news on this topic in the coming weeks, especially with the upcoming 25th anniversary of the bombing of the Chinese embassy on May 7th, which might coincide with a not yet confirmed but a rumored and partially announced visit of the Chinese president to Serbia during his European tour in the coming weeks. And with this, we should have a sufficient context to move on to input from our speakers, who will provide more detailed insight from their published or ongoing research. And we have three great speakers today, and we will start first with Elena Jovičić. Elena Jovičić is a research associate at the Institute of Economic Sciences, the Department of Macroeconomics in Belgrade, Serbia. Currently, she focuses mainly on China, Western Balkans trade and economic relations. And among other academic accomplishments, Elena is the editor of the Journal of Women's Entrepreneurship and Education, and she has been a management committee member of CHERN since 2019. And with this, I give the floor to Elena.
Yeah, hello everyone. It's a great pleasure to be part of this today's briefing. And I will try to briefly introduce some key facts and data regarding the economic cooperation between Serbia and China, with a special focus on bilateral trade in goods and the FTA. The next slide, please. And in the attempt to, and the one of the attempt to, will be the try to answer to the question whether this is the opportune moment for economic cooperation expansion between China and Serbia. Next slide, please. Namely, over the last decade, economic cooperation between Serbia and China has been steadily growing. However, the intensification of economic relations has occurred primarily in the last 5 years, because during this and simultaneously boosting bilateral trade development. Thus, in 2023, China became a leader in terms of the inflow of FDI in Serbia, and it was also the second most important trading partner of Serbia, which all sounds great at first glance. However, the cooperation is below its potential, and there have been some key challenges and issues I would like to mention. The next slide, please. Well, one of the key challenge was a huge trade deficit with China that has been almost steadily growing in the previous period. Thus, China in 2023, with a share of 41%, was the major contributor of the total Serbia's trade deficit with China. And another key issue was poorly diversified export, which was made of primary goods or goods with low added value. Thus, in 2023, for instance, copper and copper ores reached almost 92% of total Serbia's exports to China. And what is also interesting to mention, three major exporters of Serbia in 2023 were also the Chinese companies. And in the previous period, the trade cooperation has been slowed down in some respects by the existence of trade barriers, but also barriers to the Chinese market, such as existence of subsidies for the domestic companies in China, some capital restrictions on foreign investment, lack of transparency, complicated regulation processes, etc. And one of the key obstacles, for instance, was also the obtaining of permissions to export some products from Serbia, such as milk or meat. And the next slide, please. And in this regard, the FTA signing is seen as a strategic move that could not only to contribute not only to strengthening of economic and diplomatic ties, but also would open up new markets for Serbian and the Chinese companies. That could provide some better export opportunities for Serbian companies and generally to enhance bilateral trade cooperation between the two nations. And what is also important, it could help to attract the Chinese investment to strategically important sectors that would produce some products with higher value added. However, in addition to the benefits, some potential risks and challenges should be also considered. And the first concern is the asymmetry in economic size, followed by the lack of the capacities of the Serbian economy and producers to satisfy the Chinese market's demand. And also there are some worries about the potential negative impact on the local industry if the Chinese companies will enter the Serbian markets, and they will be more competitive, especially in terms of the price compared to the Serbian companies. And finally, the FTA signing would lock in some respect Serbia in a more deep long-term strategic relationship with China, while distancing Serbia from the rest of Europe and from the EU. However, at this moment, it is difficult to assess all effects of the FTA since it's yet to be implemented. However, finally, I can conclude trying to answer to the questions from the beginning of my pitch. Yes, the signing of the FTA could be an opportune moment especially for Serbia, for the enhancement of economic cooperation and trade relations with China. However, it is a question whether Serbia is prepared to use this moment appropriately, whether Serbia and Serbian authorities have an adequate strategy, capacities, etc. Otherwise, the signing of the FTA will represent success in the political context rather than in the context of economic cooperation development. That is all from my side. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Elena. That was a very interesting pitch. There were some technical issues, but hopefully everyone could hear the basis, see the slides. And as I said, this is just a beginning, so I hope people got the gist of your very interesting presentation on the economic aspects of this FTA. Now on to the more socio-political aspects. We have our next pitch from Dušica Ristivojević. Dušica Ristivojević is a multidisciplinary Chinese studies scholar who specializes in international politics, media, and social movements. In recent years, she's doing her research and lectures at the University of Helsinki, and she collaborates with activists from China, Taiwan, and Serbia, and publishes in English and Chinese about the connections between China's global politics and political movements, and also about the Chinese companies engaged in gold and copper mining in Eastern Serbia. So, Dušica, the floor is yours.
Hi. Hello. Can you hear me? Is everything okay now with the line?
Yes, perfect. And yes, the spotlight is on you.
Thank you so much for this introduction and for organizing this event. And also, I want to thank Elena for mentioning this or putting a wonderful introduction to this part of my research on, she mentioned political context as potentially one of the main uses and the benefits of both governments after the signing of the FTA, which is precisely the topic that I want to address now. I call this the presentation political capital. We could actually talk about political use or political usage by both regimes when it comes to the signing of the free trade agreement. So the next slide, please. So I want to very briefly introduce both my research and the context of my approach and my research approach to FTA. So I am not economist, but I am collaborating with a very interdisciplinary team of my colleagues, and we are observing not only FTA, but including FTA in a broader political and social context that we can observe in both China and in Serbia. So at the beginning, I want to emphasize that very often we are discussing this one level of communication between Serbia and China, which is this very macro, general, governmental and economic level of communication. And we read a lot about these win-win arrangements between the governing regimes and the business elites in both Serbia and China. However, I want to emphasize and use this opportunity to raise the attention more on something that is happening on the ground in Serbia, and especially in eastern part of Serbia, where the gold and copper mines are Chinese-owned and operated gold and copper mines are placed. So this is the area where Serbia, under quotation marks, get to the most immediate contact with what we can call global China. And what we don't hear enough in both Serbian and international media are the local protests and social mobilization on the ground in this area. I want to emphasize that at the moment that we are speaking, in one small eastern Serbian village, Krivelj, there are almost more than 3 months of blockades of the work of a mining giant that is operating in this marginalized, impoverished part of eastern Serbia. So this is the focus of my research in throughout the different disciplines and different interdisciplinary collaborations. It is very important, and I would also re-emphasize that the signing of the FTA, or the context of the signing of the FTA, happen in very specific political moments in both China and in Serbia. So participation, as Jelena emphasized, participation of Serbian delegation, in addition to Hungarian, and we could argue, is Russia a political or geographical Europe, but Putin, Orban and Vučić were the only Europeans, geographical Europeans, supporting the Third Belt and Road Forum, which was a very symbolic event, signifying the first successful decade of BRI, or China-directed global politics of connectivity. At the same time, from the Serbian side, this was also, as it is very often, a very opportune moment for the local Serbian regime, governing regime, because it was in the moment when it was just before, so we can say that it is setting the stage or contributing to the Serbian governing regime electoral campaign in Serbia. So can we go to the next slide? I want to very briefly, and this will be my last slide for this first part. I hope that we will have more time to talk in Q&A session about this. So I want to very briefly introduce the signing of the FTA as a context, which is in my research, it is observed as a very, very important part with a very big or increasingly important political capital for both sides. This political capital is playing out in both local political arenas of both sides and in international political, and we could end symbolical arenas important for both sides. So when it comes to China, signing of the FTA contributed and participated in this long-term process, in which the specific meanings and weight are given and reproduced within the foreigners, or by reporting on foreigners' views and experiences. In this context, Serbia, especially the figure of the Serbian president, very often represented in the Chinese media, very effectively transmits the messages about China's international friendships, reputation, and respect. At the same time, the participation of Serbia and the Serbian, especially Serbian president, is in the media and out of the media, in the wider political international sphere, is testifying to and contributing to building up China's projections of its global power. When it comes to Serbia, which happens at the same time and in a very complementing, useful dynamics when it comes to the Chinese counterpart, for Serbia, we can clearly detect the persistence of significant role of China in the process, which can be called as hyper-concentration of political power when it comes to the governing regime. Whereas we can identify persistent political pattern in which a Serbian governing regime manages to transfer the global power of China and China's support to the local politics of the local actors. At the same time, and importantly, when it comes to Serbian political use of not only FTA, but in general close relations to China, it very often acts as political leverage, especially in the dynamics with the EU. We could add the US, and we can put a question mark when it comes to the dynamics or to the role of close relations with China when it comes to the fourth pillar of, to the state that is the fourth pillar of the international relations in Serbia, which is Russia. So I will end up with this second slide, and I am looking forward to our Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dušica. This was a very good analysis, and especially putting it in the perspective of both sides. We sometimes focus only on the European country side, but it's important to see also that similar trends are happening in China as well. And now to conclude today's inputs with our final presentation, which gives a wider legal context in the context of other bodies that Serbia is aiming to be a part of. We have a presentation by Alexandr Svetlicinii, who is Associate Professor of Global Legal Studies at the University of Macau, Faculty of Law. He publishes extensively on the subjects of international economic law, competition law, and commercial dispute settlement, and he serves as co-director of the Academic Society for Competition Law, the Southeast Europe chapter, and he has recently published a monograph on Chinese state-owned enterprises and EU merger control for Routledge in 2021. So, Alexander, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. So in my brief presentation, I would like to address three aspects of the China-Serbia Free Trade Agreement by placing it in a wider context of the international trade governance. So let's start with the first aspect, the first point on the next slide, please. Right, so the China-Serbia FTA should be assessed in the context of the Serbia's potential accession to the World Trade Organization. We know that these accession negotiations are already going for some time, but their completion may be further delayed due to the bilateral negotiations between Serbia and certain other WTO members. But eventually, there is a perspective for WTO accession for Serbia. And China, as you know, is WTO member already since 2001. So among the core principles of the WTO is the most favored nation treatment, or the MFN, which means that every WTO member is expected to accord the same treatment towards the imports from all the other WTO members. So even though Serbia will be able to maintain preferential trade agreements, such as the one that we are discussing today between China and Serbia, the benefits of these agreements will have to be reassessed in the light of the concessions that Serbia will be granting to other WTO members upon accession, and also the enhanced access to the markets of other WTO members that Serbian products will receive as a result of this accession. So, for instance, it should be noted that the FTA between China and Serbia concerns only trade in goods, and it does not cover, for example, preferential conditions in relation to trade in services or in investments in particular. The second point on the next slide. So the accession to the WTO for Serbia stands also among the requirements for Serbia's potential accession to the European Union. For the purposes of the international trade governance, the European Union is a customs union which applies common tariffs to the imports from all third countries. So as a result of the eventual accession to the EU, Serbia will also have to abandon its existing bilateral trade deals, including the one that we are discussing today, because as a EU member, it won't be able any longer to offer any preferential conditions for market access to third countries. So to conclude, while the WTO accession will largely determine the extent of trade preferences that Serbia will be able to derive from the FTA with China, the accession to the EU or eventual accession to the EU will determine the duration of this agreement that we are discussing today. And finally, the third point on the next slide, please. So the third point is that multilateral agreements under the WTO framework, they cover a range of issues related to the international trade in goods and services. But they still have a limited coverage because they required a large international consensus. So in the absence of this consensus at the international level, the bilateral trade agreements provide an opportunity for countries to regulate issues that are not covered by the WTO rules. For example, these types of agreements like FTAs can cover issues related to investment, public procurement, environmental protection, sustainability, competition on the markets, labor and social standards, and other issues that we can generally call WTO plus or WTO extra. So if we look at the China-Serbia FTA in this way, we again will notice that it does not contain, for example, market access commitments related to trade and services and investments. China and Serbia have a bilateral investment treaty since 1995, but that treaty concerns only protection of the investments that have been already realized, but it does not grant any market access for investments. Although China-Serbia FTA includes some provisions about promoting and facilitating investments, protecting intellectual property and market competition, these provisions of the agreements, they are not subjected to the dispute settlement in case of disagreement. So this means that the implementation of these provisions will largely depend on the goodwill and the cooperation between the parties rather than binding legal rules. So to summarize these 3 points that I made above, China-Serbia FTA and the relevant concessions on the trade in goods should be assessed in the context of Serbia's eventual accession to the WTO and to the European Union. And the access of the Serbian products to the Chinese markets, as mentioned before also by Elena, it will also be affected by numerous after-border measures, right, that are applied in China on Chinese markets. So thus, they will require further cooperation of the respective governments in terms of promotion and facilitation of this bilateral trade, investment, and other forms of the economic cooperation between the two countries. So that was all for me, and thank you. I'm looking also forward to our Q&A.
Thank you so much, Alexander, and thank you to all our speakers. With the introduction and with these 3 pitches, I think we got a lot of information on the China-Serbia FTA, on economic, political, and legal aspects in both a local and a international perspective. And if we go to the next slide, Alexandra, please, I can briefly conclude the part of this session that is going to be recorded. I would like to just say that in case anyone wants to get in touch with our speakers, because the idea of the CHERN online briefings is first and foremost to connect people with only brief introductions in this online briefing format. So in case you want to get in touch with our speakers, you can do that through the event page, and you have it on our website, and the QR code takes you directly there. On the event page, you have in the biographies of all our speakers speakers links to their professional websites, and there you can get in touch with them directly if you would like to pursue this as a story to be further developed in the coming weeks and months. And I'd like to thank once again the organizers and speakers and say goodbye to our online audience.